This all started one night when I was home alone mid-November. My parents and my younger siblings had gone to visit my grandparents in London. Since I had the house to myself, I wanted to invite my friend Charlie over. It was about 8 PM and I was just about to message Charlie when I heard a loud thud coming from the downstairs window. I was upstairs laying on my bed, so I got up, crept downstairs and peered through the blinds. At first, I couldn't see much of anything, but after a while of my eyes adjusting to the inky black darkness outside, I could visibly see a figure standing in the street no more than 20 feet away from my house. I can recall in great detail what the person was wearing. They wore a grey hoodie, black trousers, black shoes, and a fuzzy grey beanie that sat lazily atop their head. The person's face wasn't very clear, but from what I could make out, it was a man with what appeared to be a crooked smile. I immediately turned, ran upstairs and back into my bedroom where I phoned Charlie. I told him about the strange person standing outside. At first, he thought I was playing around. He soon realised I wasn't joking, however, when he heard the tone of my voice. After a while of talking, Charlie arranged to come around my house. Since he lived a good 10 miles away, it would have taken him approximately 15 minutes to arrive. Foolishly, I walked back downstairs and towards my living room window. I'm not sure if it was down to fear or curiosity, but I wanted to see if the man was still there. Upon peering through the window blinds for the second time, I could see that the person in the street was still standing in the same position. His face was just as unsettling as it was before. I opened the window and called out, "Hey, is there anything I can do for you?" The person didn't respond. Instead, they just stood there, motionlessly. Feeling more than creeped out, I closed the window, shut the blinds and sat on my couch to watch some TV. About 10 minutes had passed, and I heard yet another thud against my living room window. I got up once more and peered cautiously through the blinds. What I saw outside in the street terrified me. Not because I was in any danger necessarily, but because of how strange it was. I couldn't fathom out what I was seeing. The man was still standing there, but there was somebody else standing next to him. It didn't take me too long to recognise the other person. It was Charlie. He just stood there and looked vacantly towards my window. I would have guessed that he was looking at me, but something was wrong. Charlie's face looked sunken, almost as if he hadn't slept for an entire week. I was about to open the window and call out to him, but I stopped myself when the unusual man standing next to Charlie began sprinting towards my window. In a panic, I shut the blinds, ran upstairs, and shut myself in the bedroom, slamming the door shut. Suddenly, the phone laying on my bed vibrated. A text came through from Charlie reading, "Hey man, I'll be there in about 5 minutes. I'm just at the petrol station." I soon realised that whoever was outside with that man was not Charlie. I was taking everything in when I noticed something in the corner of my eye. There, in the far corner of my room, stood the grinning man from outside. "James, hurry up," I heard my friend Derek call out to me as I was locking my front door. Both Derek and I were on our way to visit a friend's house for a pool party. There were about 15 people invited, and I wasn't the best at social events, so a pool party was a little out of my comfort zone. It was Derek that insisted we went, and since Derek was a friend, I didn't want to let him down. When we arrived, Derek and I were shocked to see that everyone was there waiting for us. This annoyed Derek greatly, as being punctual was something he prided himself in. We got out of the car and our friend Mike, the one hosting the party, called out to us, "Dude, we've been waiting for you." We all got together, went through the house and into the back garden. If it hadn't been for the loud music and the barbecue, I would have never guessed that this was a pool party. It felt more like a gathering. It was around 10 PM when things took a turn for the worst. People started to say their goodbyes and head home. In the end, it was just Derek, Mike, 4 other girls, and me. Both Derek and Mike relished the fact that there were still 4 girls with them, but due to my lack of self-confidence, I just kept myself to myself. I was sitting down by one of the poolside tables when I saw her. In the far corner of the garden, there stood a girl in a yellow swimsuit facing away from all of us. I hadn't noticed anyone in a yellow swimsuit during the day. In fact, I had never seen this girl before in my life. Slightly creeped out, I looked over towards the others. They were all just laughing and chatting amongst themselves. None of them seemed to notice the girl. I returned my gaze towards her, and she was now facing in our direction. I couldn't quite make out her facial features, but I could clearly see that she was looking in my vague direction. "Yo, James, are you going to join us, or are you just going to sit there all night?" Mike called out to me. Unnerved, I got up, walked towards the group, and sat with them. I couldn't help but notice that the girl on the far side of the garden followed my gaze. Her eyes followed me as I walked over to the poolside. Stumped as to who she was, I pointed towards her and asked, "Who is that over there?" All of them looked in the vague direction I was pointing, and then returned a confused gaze back at me. "Ooh, are you trying to scare us?" Derek joked. A couple of the girls laughed at his remark, and for obvious reasons, I felt pretty embarrassed. I ignored the girl and tried to socialise with the others. Before I had the chance to converse, Mike spoke up and offered to put us up for the night. It was just as well, as Derek was well over the legal limit. For obvious reasons, we took Mike up on his offer. I hadn't noticed it at first, but the girl on the opposite side of the garden was now gone. I searched for her, my eyes darting all around, but she was nowhere to be seen. We all went inside and Mike put on some music. After about 5 minutes, I noticed one of the girls sitting next to Derek, looking at me inquisitively. "So, what were you talking about?" "About a girl outside," she asked. I then told them about the girl again, going into more detail than I had before. I told them what she looked like, and that she was wearing a yellow swimsuit. When I said this, I saw Mike freeze and look at me with a mix of anguish and anger in his eyes. "What the hell are you talking about? Is that meant to be some kind of joke?" Mike hissed. Everyone in the room fell silent, and even Derek appeared to hit a state of sobriety. "Don't you ever joke about my sister that way again," Mike roared. After what felt like an eternity of awkward silence, Derek and one of the other girls had managed to calm him down. The following morning, I awoke to find Derek hovering over me. I looked over at the clock that was on the far side of the room, and it was 9:30. Apparently, the girls had left about 20 minutes before I woke up. Derek and I left Mike's house approximately 5 minutes later. The thing I will never forget about that party was what Derek told me on the car journey back home. Apparently, Mike had lost his sister Abby approximately 1 year ago. One night, she was hosting a house party with all of her friends for her 21st birthday celebration. In a playful manner, one of Abby's friends pushed her into the pool. However, Abby landed awkwardly, which caused her to smack her head on the edge of the pool, and this killed her almost instantly. Derek didn't believe that I'd seen Abby's ghost the previous night, but I know I'd seen her, as I hadn't been aware of any of this. To this day, Mike avoids talking to me, and I haven't been to any pool parties since. This happened to me a few years ago when I was trying out Tinder. I had tried many other dating apps in the past, but Tinder was the only one I seemed to have any luck with. I remember the night well. It was mid-June and I'd just got back from a late shift at work. I sat down on the living room couch to watch some TV when my phone buzzed. It was a notification from Tinder, so I unlocked my phone, opened up the notification, and saw that I had matched with a girl named Sarah. I was skeptical at first as her profile only had 2 low-quality images. The girl in the first photo looked absolutely nothing like the girl in the second one, so I immediately put it down as being a catfish account. Before I even had the chance to put my phone away, Sarah had sent me a message. I opened it and saw a mobile number with 2 kisses next to it. I was going to leave it, and looking back I wish I had, but I was curious as to who would answer, especially since catfish accounts didn't usually feel comfortable giving out phone numbers. I called the number and waited for a little while as the dial tone rang out. Eventually, a female voice answered saying, "Hello?" I replied with a simple, "Hey, is this Sarah?" After about 2 seconds of dead silence, she responded saying yes. I told her that I was Alex and that I was curious to know more about her as her profile was devoid of any information. She spoke again and told me that I should go outside and into the back garden. For obvious reasons, I asked her why, but she didn't respond to my question. Instead, the phone call just cut off. Approximately 10 minutes later, I got a text message from Sarah reading, "Sorry, my phone died." I felt creeped out and decided to ignore the message. Looking back, I wish I'd just blocked the number there and then. Suddenly, a string of texts came through from Sarah, all saying the same thing. "Please come outside. Please come outside. Please come outside." As creeped out as I was still very curious. I went into my kitchen and looked out of the window that overlooked my back garden. Although it was night, I could just about see someone standing there. I flicked on the patio light which was in our kitchen and froze when I saw her. There was a woman who looked to be in her mid-40s standing in my back garden. What startled me about her was the knife she was holding against her right arm. Even more unnerving was the sadistic smile plastered across her face. I turned and ran back into the living room, grabbing my house phone. I called the police and told them that there was a strange woman standing in my back garden with a knife. As I was talking to the officer on the phone, I heard the strange woman from outside call out my name from the kitchen. I suddenly remembered that I had forgotten to lock the back door. I heard footsteps running from the kitchen and towards the living room. Without any hesitation, I told the officer on the other end that she was now in my house. I then hung up, ran upstairs and into my bedroom. Whilst my bedroom door didn't have a lock, I was able to move my bedside table in front of it. It wasn't long until the police arrived, and unlike a lot of stories, they did manage to catch her hiding behind the living room sofa. They never went into any detail as to who she was, but apparently this hadn't been her first time doing this. How she found out where I lived, I'll never know. All I know is that I deactivated Tinder the following morning. Have you ever been on a ghost train? And I don't mean those industrial movie-themed rides. I mean those traditional fairground rides that are usually built into black boathouses. If your answer is yes, then you'll know just how cheap and nasty some of those things can be. For me, I always felt a wave of nostalgia wash over me whenever I rode one. That was until I rode the ghost train at Flamingo Park. Flamingo Park is a small seaside funfair located in Hastings, England. It's quaint, yet it manages to attract hundreds upon hundreds of tourists each year. I myself was one of those tourists. A little backstory. My name is Eddie, I'm 22, I live alone, and I have been going all over the UK searching for small nostalgic thrills. And yes, said thrills are in the form of childish rides, fairground arcades, and wacky funhouses. It has always been a childhood hobby, and it carried itself into my early adult life. I'll never forget what happened on that August day. I had a route set in my mind. First, I was going to ride the Dodgems, then explore the green jungle maze, and finally I was going to finish off with the ghost train. I casually made my way up to the kiosk and brought £10 worth of ride tokens. The lady behind the counter took the £10 note that I'd given her and gingerly placed it into the cash box. I was then handed one of those cash bags with 20 tokens, 2 tokens for £1. After I'd ticked off all the activities on my imaginary bucket list, I approached the old, decrepit jet black building. I deposited 3 ride tokens, 3 per person, to the man operating the ride. The first thing I was greeted with were the 2 uneven wooden doors in front of my cart. Painted on the doors was a face split in 2. On one of the doors, the face was all skull and bone. On the other, it was covered in skin and muscle. I had to admit, it looked pretty graphic, especially for a children's ride. Next, I was greeted by the male worker who gave me a cliché safety briefing. Stay in the cart, keeping your hands, arms, feet and legs inside at all times. After that, I was pushed into the pitch black darkness beyond the 2 wooden doors. When I say the cart moved slowly, I mean slowly. Slower than any other ghost train I'd ever been on. The first thing that caught my attention was how child-friendly the first room was. The whole room was covered in green, red and yellow UV paint with a buzzing purple UV light beaming overhead. I could see a creepy looking skeleton and a few ghosts painted on the far wall. Whilst the ride appeared to be moderately child-friendly, there was one thing out of place. There was this uneasy feeling that I couldn't place. Something about the room I was in felt off. After a short while, my cart made its way into the second room. This room was slightly more graphic. Directly in front of my cart was a realistic looking prisoner in an electric chair. He threw himself back and forth whilst making muffled pleading noises. This was unsettling, but still fairly good for a small, low-budget ghost train. The third room was where things started to get weird. In this room, a clown pressed itself up against a metal gate, whilst an animatronic lifted its head out of the socket. That wasn't what was weird though. What was weird were the random dolls scattered all over the floor. At first, I thought they were just part of the ride and thought nothing of it, but they were all in seemingly good condition. The fourth room was the one I'll never forget. The ride itself was pretty dark, so I was tempted to pull out my phone for some light. That's when I heard her. I don't know if it was just my mind playing tricks on me, but I could hear a faint, whimpering sound. It almost sounded like crying. I assumed it was a passenger in another cart, either in front or behind me, but it was close. Apart from the distant whimpering, the room was quiet. Suddenly, the crying changed, and it turned into a deep, raspy laugh. The laughing was low, too low to be a person. I thought that it must have been a hi-fi speaker system, and deep down, I was praying to myself that it was. The laughing then ceased, and my cart slowly started to move again. The only odd thing about this room was that it seemed to go on forever. No props, no lights, nothing. The only sound now were the cart's wheels rumbling across the floor. It took me a little while to notice, but I realised that something else was wrong too. I would say it took about 30 seconds until I placed what it was. My cart wasn't moving by itself. It was being pushed. I only realised when I heard heavy breathing other than my own directly behind me. I hoped to God that it was just the worker messing with me, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. "Who's there?" I sheepishly asked. What followed next was something I'll never forget. The cart suddenly stopped, as did the breathing behind me. Taking its place were the sounds of light footsteps circling around my cart. I wanted to pull out my phone there and then for some light, but I was paralysed with fear. The room around me was pitch black, but I could visualise what my face must have looked like in that moment. I then felt someone get into the cart with me. Their face felt like it was merely inches away from my own. Not only that, but I could distinctly feel a warm breath on my neck. I don't know what it was, but something caused me to regain conscious movement. I shoved my hand into my right trouser pocket, fumbled around for my phone, and pulled it out without any hesitation. I turned on the phone's torch and shined it in front of me. There was nothing, just a track that seemed to go on into an endless void. I then shined my phone to where the breathing was coming from, and I froze. The face, that was merely inches away from my own, was absolutely terrifying. It was a woman of average height. Her wavy brown hair hung in clumps down either side, but her face is what still haunts me to this day. It was hollow. Her whole face was like one big mouth. No eyes, no nose, and no ears. I practically dropped my phone when I saw a dark green liquid begin to pool on the inside of her face. The thick liquid oozed down either side, and I could feel myself on the verge of vomiting. Still holding my phone, I looked down with the beaming light and saw that her hand was gingerly placed on my right leg. Her fingers were all wrong. Where her thumb should have been was an index finger, and where her middle finger should have been was a thumb. None of her fingers appeared to be in the right place. I looked back up and gasped as her face was now a mere inch away from my own. I thrashed around violently, screaming until eventually I passed out. The next thing I knew, I was outside with paramedics all around me. Ride workers, parents and children all stood around me, passing strange looks at each other. I felt slightly embarrassed, but after what I'd just seen, I couldn't do anything. Apparently, one of the workers had heard me shouting and came in to find me curled up on the floor next to my cart, which had broken down. I was rushed to a hospital later on that day, and after a few hours, they found no issues regarding my physical health, so needless to say, I was sent home. It has been years since this happened, and I've only just plucked up the courage to talk about this now. I was always scared to tell people, fearing they might call me crazy. I would have agreed with the notion that I was crazy, had it not been for the dark green stains on my clothes. It doesn't look like this has happened to anybody else, but just to be safe, don't ride the Flamingo Park ghost train. It had been 3 months since my ex-girlfriend Emily broke up with me. I was a little heartbroken when it happened, but after about a month, I understood why she broke it off. During the 3-month period of living the single life, I installed a dating app onto my phone. Funnily enough, it was the same app I'd used to meet Emily. For obvious reasons, I had deleted the app once I'd got into a relationship with Emily, but now that we'd broken up, it seemed like the right time to get myself back out there. After a few days of hardly any matches, I eventually matched with a girl named Zoe. I checked out her profile for a little while before sending her a couple of messages. Her profile seemed pretty generic, but her page connected me to all kinds of different social media pages, all of which appeared to belong to Zoe. It took a little time until I got a reply, but when I did, I was confused with what she had sent me. She had sent a string of random letters, and then sent another message reading, "Sorry, that wasn't for you." Confused, I ignored the weird messages and continued to message her. About a week had passed, and I was really building up a friendship with Zoe. Whilst we didn't necessarily like the same activities, we did share some common interests. Eventually, I asked if she wanted to meet up the following Saturday, to which she said yes. We had arranged to meet at our local park, as I had heard enough stories to not meet up with a stranger at a strange location or at night, so we set 2 PM as our meeting time. Come 2 PM on Saturday, I was pleasantly surprised to see the same girl from the app sitting on one of the park benches. I nervously introduced myself and sat down with her. We were talking for a little while when I noticed that something was wrong. Directly behind Zoe, approximately 20 feet away, I saw a large man leaning up against a tree, staring at us. I ignored the man and continued to talk with Zoe in the hope that my unease wouldn't show. Something told me that Zoe could tell I was suspicious, but if she did know, she wasn't letting on. About a minute later, I noticed another large man sitting on one of the benches to my left, looking in our direction. Although he wasn't as large as the first man, he still made me feel incredibly uneasy. I decided to break away from the conversation and tell Zoe that I wasn't feeling great. I didn't know what was going on, but I didn't want to be on that park bench any longer. When I did finally manage to break away from Zoe, I felt a buzz come from my right trouser pocket. I pulled out my phone and saw that I'd received a notification from the dating app. It was a message from Zoe. I opened up the message and saw a jumble of letters and numbers. There was something wrong with the message, but I didn't have the time to figure it out. Suddenly, I saw Zoe signal to the men, and they began to approach us. Overtaken by an extreme amount of anxiety, I began running away from the park. When I got to the other end, I looked around to see that the shorter man sprinting after me. Zoe, or who I thought was Zoe, and the other larger man stayed behind. Luckily, I was a lot faster than my pursuer, and I was able to get away. Later that day, I contacted the authorities, and they are still on the case to find out who those people were. The story doesn't end there though, because just as I was about to delete the app later that afternoon, I reread the jumble of letters and numbers that were sent to me. Within the mess of random letters and numbers were the words, "Don't trust her." To this day, I have no idea what or why any of this happened. All I know is that I haven't used online dating apps since.